purchasers of goods and services are governments with our tax dollars. And governments, the subnational governments, that is provincial, municipal governments, have the ability now to use our tax dollars for economic development, for environmental considerations, for reaching out, for example, providing jobs for First Nations people. They can put conditions on it. What this deal would do is remove the power of government and open that up to the market completely. So we already have a trade imbalance with Europe at a rate of $15 to $1, 15 billion to 1 billion Canadian. And we have already lost over the last few years more than 500,000 manufacturing and value-added jobs in Canada. This agreement would prevent procurement such as the City of Toronto TTC procurement, which directed $1.2 billion, potentially going to $3 billion, the largest transit purchase in North America, from deciding that was going to be a Canadian purchase. And an independent study found that for every job created directly through that purchase, there would be an additional 9 jobs created through spin-offs, sub-assembly services, etc. So it is this basic economic development and, in fact, environmental and social justice development that would be prevented with this agreement. Pretty significant and very explicitly demanded by the Europeans. So that's a big concern, I think, for us, and should be a concern for all Canadians.
I think the Canadian government has shown that it's willing and capable of signing egregiously one-sided agreements. It just did on February 16th with the United States, the Buy American Procurement Agreement, where there were very little gains for Canadian manufacturing in return for quite a bit more access, in a sense, for the United States. I think what Europeans will be interested to know is that, and you bring up the multilateral agreement on investment, is that there hasn't been an investor-state type clause in Europe. There have been at the state level, and Canada has a few agreements with some countries. These, as I understand it, are now illegal under the Lisbon Treaty. But what Europe wants is very desperately to sign a multilateral agreement on investment. It can do this with Canada, and it can get those kinds of domestic reforms, which is why we keep emphasizing here that even if the Canadian government does not get what it seems to be seeking in this, the benefit will be if Europe gets everything. I mean, this is compatible with the Harper agenda, I think, for Canada, is if Europe gets everything it's asking for. What does Europe want out of this? We've seen they have agreements with Korea right now, with India. They're aggressively seeking market opening agreements with other countries. Europe does currently have a trade deficit, as I understand it, with the rest of the world. And it does want to, it wants to establish, I mean, in many ways it might even want to kind of set the terms of global trade in many ways. The other context is the WTO having been stalled for so many years. Europe has been, for the past 3 or 4 years now, where it wasn't before, considering regional and bilateral agreements as an alternative to the WTO in terms of getting its market opening priorities. But people do think of Europe as this very kind of where the social protections are higher, and in many ways that's true, but you have to factor in that they have a European Commission with many of the same agendas as we have here in Canada with the Harper government, which is one of deregulation and privatization within the Union itself, as well as pushing aggressive market access abroad. So it's changing itself. The European Commission is becoming more powerful through these increasing treaties.
Europe is not exporting the European social model through this treaty. We're dealing with the Director General DG Trade, which is one of the most neoliberal parts of the European government in the European Commission, and they are aggressively promoting the interests of their multinational traders, and that's what this agreement is about. Not about the European social model or moving Canada to European style regulatory or public service standards.
It's beginning. We know that today, as we're releasing this, the Public Services International and the EPSU, European Public Services Union, are also raising the exact same questions based on this leaked text. We also know that these organizations are starting to think of it, but within Europe there has been a lot of I mean, there's other agreements that they're fighting, essentially. The Canadian one is new on the radar. But as it is here, right, as we've been saying, there's been very little public awareness, I think, of the extent of this until today, and that's why we're releasing the document.
Well, certainly the European Commission is in a powerful position to speak for the trade interests of the European Union. There are certain areas where member governments still have competence. I think the whole issue of somehow Canadian federalism weakening our position internationally is quite overblown. But of course the Europeans are quite conscious that most of the gains that they want to make in this treaty fall within provincial jurisdiction, procurement, regulation of most services, including public services, delivery of public services, many issues around municipalities. So they have insisted that the provinces be present at the table, and this is actually the first international trade negotiation where provincial governments are directly represented at the table. That's never happened before. From my perspective, and I think from most of our perspective here, we hope that provincial governments and municipal governments will not be stampeded into acceding to this diminishing of their democratic authority. Once changes are made through this treaty, they are, for all intents and purposes, permanent.